Ladies and gentlemen, likers and subscribers, hobbyists, model makers, nerds of all kinds, welcome. I'm the Glue and Paper Guy. I've eliminated the boring parts for you and brought forward the wheel construction to this point. I have all of the axles, all of the struts on that side, and 3 of the struts on this side. Why 3? Because I'm going to glue behind the other 3 and hold the wheel in place at a specific depth. I set the specific depth. I actually measured it. It's arbitrary, such that all of the wheels are of a similar depth. More or less eyeballed them in the center and then marked the number and wrote it down so that as time passed I would have the number. So I now have my intersection, my forward hub, my external outside hub. Not a lot of rocket science there. Tuck it in, and it's sitting down at the bottom waiting. This guy is just a piece of wood of a calibrated length. Could be anything to keep the distance consistent between the surfaces of, you'll see in a moment that it simply becomes a sandwich. CA gel is fast and accurate. I don't have to think a lot. I knocked a piece off, which I'll have to repair. With that, you can tell I'm not even worried about being in the center. It just needs to hold the distance and not interfere with the side of the wheel. I got that glued. The tube keeps everything aligned, and it's more or less lined up. This one probably won't be lined up. The idea is to make a wheel strut there meet a seam, and then repeat the process on the back. I didn't do that, so if I make one of these meet this, it's now a unit. One of those meets the seam, I'm off by some measure. That's okay. First time I've done this kit. Won't be the last time during these videos that I make an excuse for not having detail as pretty as possible. This intent here obviously is to focus on process, not perfection. In the process of forgetting, I also forgot this. What I did was use CA to turn the strip of paper into a cohesive unit, and obviously forgot to do it on that one. I've already measured the final 3 axles, and this probably won't come through on camera, but it's been CA'd to within an inch of its life. I just rub gel on there and the gel soaks into the paper and makes it stiffer and stronger. Whether it chemically primes it and makes it easier to bond or not, I don't know. And I can see that I've measured it. Each one of these is going to be more or less the same length. Close enough as makes no difference. Now, I've done this enough times, I should be able to really make it look easy. And I'll cover myself by making the front one match a seam, so that upper strut matches exactly in the front. And my sins will be hidden a bit in the back. Not exactly level. If I do a better finished rendition of this kit, I'll use calibrated tubes or plastic tubes or something to separate the sides of the wheel so that I'm certain that I have a square point. I have this, it just wants to slide out because this is a little bit wide. But I'm still on the mark. So I have that by the way is what the back end of your caliper is for, depth. Now I have it at depth. And we start playing test your hand-eye coordination. Having just set that wheel, I don't want to release it. So I'm going to cut this stuff one-handed, chase it across the desk, bring it home. I may as well cut them all while I'm here. That way I won't be quite as ham-fisted. The second and last spoke are suddenly easy because everything is glued in place. All right, I have 3 spokes now. And we'll just, not too much, because it's going to get ugly. But I add a little extra at the end there, and I have way too much on there. Add a little extra at the inner point of the tire. First time I've done this today, and I've been in the shop all day, so my hands are shakier than usual. I made a mess of it. Now when this cures, it's not going anywhere. The other 2 are going to be prettier. And another thought occurs. The right way to do this is simple. Make an extra hub or 2 of a calibrated height. Slip them into the wheel on one side, drop the finished pieces correctly oriented in place with a calibrated center, and then pop the extra pieces out the front with a hobby knife later. And what you'll get is a much better constructed wheel than I've managed to pull off there. We'll do a couple of things. I'm going to clean up the edge of this so that I'm not the CA builds up on the tip. Scrape it off, and it's easier to see when it comes out. Now I get the part in hand and try to do this much more elegantly. Make it look like the professional I fancy myself to be. A little bit on the end there. That's my hold for the inner parts. A little bit on the bottom. There's some on the pliers, but the CA will not bond to the metal near as well as it will to the paper. And that one came out not on perfect. Although they cure quickly. That's a pretty whopper job wheel. Still, it's the last of way too many. I'm not going to do that math. There are 12 of these on every wheel. 12 times 6. There's my inside. And I'm getting glue all over everything. Good idea to keep the good stuff out of the way of the work surface. Inside, this is the rolled on the ground, and I tried to keep them oriented similarly. I'm not sure that's important because obviously if you do it either way, the pattern's the same. So that was a matter of working too hard. It is way smarter to wrap the wheel before you put it together than after. I did that once. That's why I'm way smarter now. That's one of the reasons why printing a kit twice allows you to screw this stuff up, figure out how to do it properly, and then proceed. The first 96 scale Gemini I did was surprisingly good, but the 5th or 6th is really nice. In fact, that's one of the specific things that kept me doing this. When I made the first Gemini capsule with its service module attached, it came out so well, so perfectly. Ton's pattern made it so nice that, I just, in retrospect, had it been junk, I might have just dropped it and gone on to something else. But it came out so beautifully that I kept it up. Kind of a, hey, I can do this sort of a thing. The point at which you glue this on is arbitrary. To me, it's probably better to do it where the seam is, so I'll just come up here. And before I go the rest of the way, I'm going to put some black in that area. Dropping it on the table allows me to keep that square. I'm simply using this extended part to make that properly perpendicular. Now, the glue is beginning to cure, and it's pretty obvious that that's going to go on in a perpendicular fashion and not come out either way. Perfectly good time to clean it up. This is one of those cases where the ink bleeding is of value. In fact, it's kind of fun. On the other end, the ink bleeds into the paper far enough that the inevitable distance mismatch doesn't have to be recolored because there's ink in the paper. So this here is black, at least inside the paper, or at least half the distance of that mark. Try and get it there. So it's not half the distance of that line. That paper, if I cut it, will be as black as it is on the edge. Because it's square on the inner wheel. I guess, now at the 11th hour, I guess probably the right way to call it would be to call it a rim, and this the tire. But of course, functionally, that's simply not true on the real thing. Touch longer than it should be. I'm satisfied that I cut it correctly, and this was the first time John did this, so I would not be surprised if the actual length of the pattern parts weren't slightly different. Probably one of his, part of his intent was no doubt to make it be certain that if there was any difference in the paper size or something, you could still wrap the outside wrap the tire around the rim. Less is more. I'm going to use the end of this little metal rule because it's inherently square if I can get it on the edge over here with I'm casting about for something, and probably the edge of this would be fine. And I'm also, I tried a couple different ways to mark these. Let me get this up a little bit where it's easier to see. I tried a bunch of different ways to mark these and do one cut the first time. And pretty much a soup sandwich. It didn't work. So successive approximation is the answer. It's blacker than you might be otherwise, but not as black as you might want it to be. So let me see if it fits, and then I'll recolor it. So I'm still standing proud, but it's a very small distance more. So I need to take off, that's about half of, you know. You take off, like this is the thickness of a baby hair instead of a beard hair. That might be too much, actually. Well, we have a winner. That comes so close as makes no difference. I always go a little bit under the edges. I think that in the case of if something lifts away or what have you, that little bit under the edge helps to hide the fact that it's made of paper and sell the result a little bit. Not bright enough to find. There it is. You don't have to glue this whole thing. It's a waste of time and effort. I'm just going to glue about as much as I did the first time, and it's not going anywhere. It's not going to be stronger or weaker. It will stay together and be very nice. The other 5 wheels demonstrate that clearly. I wondered to myself if there's a way to put sort of a timer on in the video window, because I mean this is real time. I haven't sped it up or done anything to it, and so the ink is wetting and curing as the material takes the moisture, the water, out of the glue. The glue begins to cure chemically. I mean, it's no shorter or longer than that. So that's a pretty creditable wheel. And I've figured out better ways to do this. And, you know, next time it'll be better. The mount for the wheel, it's somewhat more complex, you know, folding up a box. I worked from here out and then in. I did one side and then the other to get a good result. And on a couple of them, I actually trimmed the edges. There's a little sliver right there at the knuckle, at the turn right here, that I did not cut. So I'll fold that up and we'll go from there. We're going to call this, actually no, there's one more step. I'm going to make one of these tubes for you. After I demonstrate that, we're going to call this, we're going to wrap this and call it episode 1 and go from there. A bunch of old friends here, some a little newer, some a lot older. This is Ton Noteboom's 48 scale Apollo service module. Our older cat helped to make some modifications. All of this showing off is about cylinder seams, something I'll probably revisit many times. There are several examples of how a cylinder seam will close up, and this is probably the most clear because it's so obvious. That's the escape tower from the 48 scale, which I didn't bother to dust before I brought it on camera. This is a big cylinder. The big cylinder was rolled over just like you just saw, and there is a ridge here. At this point, I had gotten smart enough to do a series of things to protect against glue problems and the other tendency that I alluded to have a seam. So that's rolled over. That is not flat. So thankfully I was bright enough not to make that on the money side. There's the money side of the construction. On display, this disappears behind and the illusion is enhanced. I did the other method here. Watch the pointer. There's a click, but no real pause. If I do that here, I'm not going anywhere. This side is higher than this side. These two sides are flat together. How'd I do that? This one was quite complex. When Ton Noteboom designed this, he designed it with an extra piece that is glued partially behind the seam. What that allows is for the exterior to be level. Ton also laid that on a seam line where exterior detail did its thing, and it helps to blend the surface. When I put this together, I used pretty much a three-step method. Cut the part, cut the strap inside, and then put glue or tape on the edge. So I wrapped this thing around itself, joined it here, sealed the tape, and then glued it. And what I got was this perfectly mated seam. It's flat. And other examples, that's the command module for that same pattern. Complete with the block 2 docking probe. The heat shield is wrapped. One layer. The CM is not. I hadn't gotten smart enough to do color edges yet in those days, but that's the only flaw. I don't know whether to be apparent on camera or not, but some of the other flaws, if I'm forming this or what have you, there's an edge there where that 2-layer paper glued together and left a mark if you pay attention to it. But it disappears almost instantaneously when you move it around. So that's that. 96 scale pattern by Ton. Another example, and I like that one. That's a really good joint. It disappears completely. All of this Oh, by the way, this guy's magnetic. I believe that this right here in my hand is the first time I ever used a magnet in a model. More cat predation. The whole Saturn stack hit the floor and bent the nose. You know, it's like so many of these things, it's going to need some repair. There's another example. That's just laid over. I could have done more on this motor. Thrust bell. I want to do this stack again in precise 96 scale. I want to do it in precise 96 scale and match it with Von Braun's Mars rocket. This is going to be a layover, just like the other one was. And then we'll mount the ends. Same drill, little to big. On the inside end first. This is nice and long too, so I can do some other tricks. I can, you know, pull it against my finger. A little faster. Any real space modeling has two components: cylinders and frustums. A frustum is a truncated cone. So the CM is a frustum, the SM is a cylinder. Rinse, repeat. If you do a lot of this, you will learn how to make your own frustums, which I might go through one day. If all goes well, keeping with the real space theme, I want to I think about shooting a tandem build again and ignoring Shrek yet again by doing a very large model, and actually two large models. I am compelled to do the 1/12 scale John Jay Curiosity. Knowing that the artist is departed, and the beauty of that pattern combined makes me very interested in experiencing it and sharing it. The edges here are tougher to color. I probably should have done it when it was flat. That's just going to make a mess. Just doing what I can to hide that. Blue Dalmazo uses matte clear as his final layer on many of his works to sell them, to hide the fact that they're toys.
It's 2 o'clock.
What I'm doing here is intended to sell the result, make it less toy-like. Now, well, this thing, Julius P's pattern is exquisitely detailed and executed marvelously. It is still somewhat representational. realism is not as high as it might be in comparison to Ton's patterns to my right there, where his goal was much more moved toward realism. Interesting when you think about it. There is no such thing as an aged Saturn stack, except for the one in front of JSC in Houston. We don't know what the LEM or the command module looked like after use, because it didn't come home. And a Saturn stack rolled on the crawler to the pad and then headed for the sky and landed in the ocean. So it is pointless to age some real space models. Falcon? We know all about what they're going to look like after they've been used. Sometimes a straight up roll is much easier to accomplish than one of those flat joints, simply because all you're doing is rolling it. It's probably a little, I'm doing that off camera, just getting the excess off the tip. Probably a tad excessive. I'm flicking the edge to get an even coat. And then stroking the edge with my finger, because that minimizes the amount of glue that sticks over, but remains, there's enough remains on the joint to do the work. At some point I'm going to figure out what that white thing is stuck to my thumb. This one's easy, because it's, you know, on the big side, and it's straight. When I grab these things, I tend to walk down from one end to the other, encouraging it to wet and bond on one end and working my way. And the other thing that I do, see how close I can get there, the edge of the pliers stays very, very close to the edge of the paper, but stays away from it, thus avoiding the possibility of spreading any excess glue and leaving behind that's 100. You may be able to see the striations in the paper. Paper has grain. This part was done cross grain. You can attend to that as you make them. And every once in a while, you get a cylinder where you get lucky and the grain is in the right direction and it becomes much smoother. I have a clean side. I can just do this. More rain coming. The thunder was to the west. When I'm spreading the glue, I am helping it to wet to that side of the paper. There's no detail on the shaft itself, so I can pick which end goes where. I'll center that up. Get it as round as I can. I'm going to press it on the table. And if I press it on the table and hold it, and let it wet there, I'll get a better edge. Eeny, meeny, miny. That's a pretty darn good result. I can get in there with something and darken that. And we'll repeat here. When I'm watching somebody else do this, I find myself, you know, wanting to see the whole process. I want to see if he gets away with it. That's a lot of glue, so I'm being real careful. Get in there. I was convinced my entire young life that my father had some special power over inanimate objects because he could use magic words on them. And if those magic words were used loudly enough and often enough, the result was miraculous. Typewriters finally tabbed. Paper finally pulled out. Spent the rest of my life trying to avoid that habit. Yeah. Pointless philosophy and a lot of time, but that's what you get. So where are we? We have 2 entire bogey sets, partially assembled. This is going to be fully assembled in a breath or two. And all the tubes to do that. Those will go together when the chassis comes together. Coming up, I'm going to focus on Julius's chassis. I just had some idle time, and so I had to build it. The rocker there has a nail underneath it so that it goes this way and can move. The bars are bent such that they'll connect. And of course, we have the full bogey set. So in the next episode, I'm going to try to get here with Julius's pattern to the point where I can get that all joined together. And with that long video that I hope folks don't find too tedious is at an end, and we'll move to the next thing.